But speaking of war, I'm going to ask you what everybody is wondering. Everybody that's going to be tuning in wants to know what you think about what's going on. Are we going to World War III? Be honest.
By the think tanks and the military planning organizations, both corporate and governmental, they all agree we're in World War IV, and so these are all technical terms. If you don't read what the Rand Corporation says or what the Russians say or what the Pentagon says, but this is in the Army War College and all the thinking. The Cold War was seen as the Third World War, and it was an asymmetrical beginning of fifth generational warfare, economic, propaganda, information war, terrorism, some kinetic, and then out of that, we are now in what you would call the Fourth World War. Now, academically, people can look that up. And when you have major power blocks that can project global power, military, economic, cultural, lined up against other power blocks that can do the same, and then you have major kinetic, multiple conflicts with the same adversaries using that as proxy war or hybrid war, then that is the definition of a world war. And so I said back in December of last year, I said within a week, because I could see it all lined up, I said you will see major academics and world leaders announce that we are in a new world war. And you notice they call it a new world war. It's not World War III. Everybody thought of World War III as a big nuclear war with the Russians. That's kind of the idea they have. But in actual military doctrinal training, and most people think of military training as kind of the door kickers and people flying F-16s and drone operators and tank drivers and Navy SEALs and all that. And that's the boots on the ground, the final phase of total war. But everything's a war. And so most of the military planning and the money and everything is actually into the cyber and the satellites and the connectivity and the control systems, and is in doctrinal threat escalation ladders. And so, and so at that level, again, most people, no matter where you are in the world, they think of military as soldiers and sailors and actual physical kinetic battle. But that's one layer to it, where the rubber meets the road of actually occupying something in classic kinetic. But as for 80% really or more of real military planning is in cultural outreach, psychological warfare, winning hearts and minds, all the things that are going on. And then you got to know who the different blocks are, the different power structures. And so we're in the Fourth World War right now. The average person doesn't even know who the alliances are, who the players are. And so Israel, going after Iran's nuclear program, is part of a long-term strategic plan that's several decades old, really 30 years old, to take down all of those regimes. And they finally took down Syria about 7 months ago, and then now there's the taking down of Iran, and so and the United States is being not sucked directly into it. The United States already provided the weapons, is already heavily involved in all the intelligence and the guidance. It was the U.S., from the destroyers there in the Mediterranean, shooting down most of those missiles that were, in the last few days raining down on Israel.
That's terrifying that you say we skipped right over World War III and went straight to World War IV. Who was it that gave the quote that said, I don't know what World War III will be fought with, but World War IV? Do you remember that quote?
Albert Einstein.
Yeah, what did he say? Do you remember how it
goes?
He
said, I don't know what World War III will be fought with, because they were, when he said that, I think it was in the 50s, they were developing the nukes and the hydrogen bombs and all that stuff. There was a big proliferation. He said, I don't know what World War III will be fought with, but I know that World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
That's terrifying.
That's very sentient. Yeah. And people should see the movie Oppenheimer. It's pretty accurate and powerful, dealing with all that. But again, everybody thought of World War III as Russians nuclear. So the general public has that idea. That's what that means when you say World War III. But that's over. We're now in World War IV, and World War IV is much hotter, way more kinetic, And you got 1 million dead Russians and wounded, just on the Russian side, probably more than that with the Ukrainians. And that's the biggest battles since World War II. And you could say Korea was just as bad for actual just straight up big armies clashing into each other. And it's now basically moved into a high-tech form of trench warfare, World War I 2.0. And that's what the Pentagon, the Russians call it that too. Every war is really called since the 60s in McNamara, it's called a laboratory or a war game.
Yeah.
So real wars are called war games or a theater laboratory testing events. And so all of it is just an ongoing system. And the issue is Iran does have sleeper cells all over the West that make Al-Qaeda and ISIS look like amateurs. The Shiites are, hands down, when dealing with the different Muslim sects, are per capita the most professional and dangerous and fanatical. You've dealt with a lot of the people, but obviously in Afghanistan, that's the other main sect of it. But that's one of the other more competent groups. But they have people all over the place, and they have said that they will use asymmetrical warfare against us. But Putin has, in the last few days, told the Iranians they need to put up the white flag.
Really?
Because if they don't give up the nuclear program, then Israel is going to continue to bombard them, and then if any U.S. targets get hit by the Iranians, then the United States is going to come fully into that. And the CIA and the U.S. Funded Saddam Hussein in the 80s to attack Iran. A couple million Iranians died, about 1 million Iraqis in that, and that was very World War I-ish as well, and trench warfare, all that. And the Iranians didn't give up in that. So it's 3 times the size of Iraq. So it's a big problem. And you need to say, are you for Israel? Are you for the Iranians? Obviously, I don't like the mullahs. I know the history of the mullahs. It's fantastically bizarre. And they're not even Persians. They're from Saudi Arabia.
So the regime that's running Iran is not even Persian.
Well, some of them intermarried, but the Shiites are about 19% of Islam. And then you've got about 79% is on Wahhabists, and that's what's based out of Saudi Arabia. But Muhammad, 1,500 years ago, was in Mecca.
Right.
He was a warlord and a slaver, everything else. And he kind of took Judaism and Christianity and Zoroastrianism and a bunch of other stuff and just kind of mixed it into a book. And it said, by the way, I'm the prophet. Now you're going to invade and take over. And within 100 years of him being dead, they'd already taken over the whole Middle East.
Yeah.
And then there was a big fight a few hundred years later. The Shiites were saying, no, you've got to be a cleric, you've got to be related to Muhammad. And the Wahhabists were smarter, and they said, no, anybody that can be inspired by God could speak and preach. So more people wanted to be in that. That's a bigger church, easier to get into. Because they already dominated the area. Well, they had their own civil war. And so there was a big civil war with people that were related to Muhammad, and they ended up being mainly in eastern Iraq and then running kind of the mountains of Iran because the Wahhabists basically drove them out and beat them. So they've had that fight going on for over 1,000 years. But if you look at all the leadership of Iran, the clerics and the generals, they're all cousins and stuff, and they all look basically the same. You look at the Persians; they don't look a lot like them, and it's because they're literally a royal genetic dynasty from one man. So it's a religious kingdom, and so that's why it's the Islamic State of Iran. And so you have the clerics that rule, the mullahs that rule as a genetic dynasty of Muhammad, and they all basically appoint whoever is bred in the bloodlines to be the most of Muhammad. And so, that's just wild.
So in Iran, you have a country where I've been seeing tons of videos with large gatherings of Iranians celebrating as the missiles were coming in. What would you say? Because there's a lot of people out there that are saying like you just said 17%, right? There's 17%,
18, 19%, whatever they do.
So is that indicative of like the country and how they feel about the regime that's running things in Iran? Like,
yes, the Iranians, the Persians are one of the oldest, if not they're like mathematics, Arabic, all of it comes from them. And so, Judaism, so much of what Judaism follows is actually out of that.
Yeah.
If you actually look at the two things, it's like Judaism adopted a lot of that. It's one of the oldest cultures in the world. And that whole area was not Islamic. The Muslims have just been invading. Like India used to be 3 times bigger. It used to be Pakistan, Afghanistan, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And then the quote Aryans, that's where Hitler got the idea. It means Iran. That's what comes from that area. Is there's the Persians, and you famously got them and go in and try and take Greece and their empire and the Battle of 300, all that. That's where it was with that Persian Empire, and they conquered Jerusalem and all sorts of stuff. But when you look at the Persians in 1953, see, we ask who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. They had Muhammad Mossadegh, who wasn't even a Muslim, was trained in the West and was modernizing Persia, which was already modern. And then what's BP today, the British oil company, wanted all the money from their oil. And he said, no, we'll give you half. So they overthrew him using a bunch of jihadis. Then they double-crossed them. And then they put in the Shah, who was part of the royal bloodline from the dynasty before. And then when he wanted to modernize and not be controlled by the West, even though he was pro-West, was even Islamic, they kicked him out. And then wink, wink, had Iran-Contra, where the CIA put the mullahs and the Ayatollah Khomeini in power. Doesn't mean he works for them. No, but they brought him from Paris and put him in there. Then they capture all of our people. They overrun the embassy. That's the CIA doing that to embarrass Jimmy Carter. And then the day Reagan's elected, then they go, we're going to release the hostages now. And that was a deal for Iran to give a bunch of weapons to the Contras to fight communists in Latin America. And you ask, well, how would the Muslims have, or how would the Shiites come in and take over all these weapons? Iran had that's why most of their weapons are U.S. weapons even today. They just upkept them, the helicopters, the jets, all that. That was all U.S. weapons and tow missiles and, tens of thousands of them and everything else. And so Congress wasn't letting the CIA and Reagan give those weapons to the Contras. So they said, that's fine. We got a whole bunch of weapons over there. We'll just resupply with those. Just like Congress wasn't going to fund any more overthrowing Assad in Syria. So we had the withdrawal in Afghanistan and left $80-something billion of weapons. Well, those were then used to overthrow Assad. So that's how the deep state works. Oh, Congress won't give us the funds? Well, they've got deals. All these countries have huge weapons caches that are theirs. And then they can always move that to test. So people ask, am I for Israel? Yeah, I don't want Israel blown off the map. I'm not into this whole trendy thing of just thinking, if I slip on a banana peel, Jews did it. But also, Israel's done some corrupt things, manipulates our government and back and forth. It's just like any of these big corrupt governments. It's not off limits to criticize them. But people ask, well, are you for Israel or are you for Iran? I'm against the CIA in 1953 in Operation Ajax overthrowing Mohammed Mossadegh, who was pro-America and like a liberal, like real liberal, like freedom, all that stuff. Then they put the Shah in, overthrow him, help the Shiites get in. Now here we are 46 years later. So that's a long way to answer your question. The Iranians, who are really the Persians, are very smart people, and they've done internal studies and polls. Upwards of 60% hate the government. If you look at Iran before the Islamists took it over in 1979, it's good-looking women in bikinis, rock and roll music, Coca-Cola, blue jeans, and Jack Daniels. And the Muslims were not even. There were a lot of Muslims there, but they were not running things. But you can get the Muslims to vote in one block or do what you say. It wasn't voting; they took over, and they just came in and took over because at the end of the day, the West and Israel as well don't want competent, successful people in the area on average. That's why in 1979, Israel admits they founded Hamas because they didn't like the Palestinian Authority was becoming mainline and saying, okay, we want hotels and swimming pools and golf courses.
Yeah.
And they went, no, you don't. Here's this group,
Right.
jihadis. And
yeah, those old videos are kind of crazy. Like back in the day, you would see people like water skiing and at the beach, and there's no dress, there's no headdress, there's nothing. They just look like normal Western civilized people out there.
exactly. And so was Lebanon, mainly.
Yeah.
I mean, all of it. It was like the French Riviera.
Yeah.
And the West went in.
They looked so happy too, didn't they?
They were. They were. And the thing is that, I mean, the Middle East and that whole area before Muhammad, had its issues, and just like the West had slavery and things, but it had a lot of civilization, and a lot of civilization we have comes out. It's not like those people are stupid, but they put a literal slave trading guy that raided caravans that came out of the East. That's Crossroads there in Mecca. That's the founder of this.
Yeah.
And so, despite that and all the conquests of the Muslims and hundreds of attacks in the West, the Crusades were a response to that. Liberal media kind of just starts with the Crusades to tell you why there were Crusades. Like most of Spain got taken over 500 years by the Muslims. And but since then there have been some reform in Islam, and it saw the West and everything was like trying to come in. And then the CIA and MI6 and later the Mossad, they came in and literally funded and planted the worst jihadis you can imagine. So people are asking, am I for Israel, against it? I'm not against Israel existing. I don't even blame Israel totally for this. This was a plan of the British intelligence, the U.S. intelligence, but Israel does a really good job going through with it and is their own boss. But they're certainly a partner in this. It's just that everybody that wants to then just be totally for Israel needs to understand that when Trump was president-elect, Israel, Turkey, and NATO, with all those weapons out of Afghanistan, overthrew Assad, who compared to these other people in the area, it was a peacemaker, basically. They call him brutal murder and all this stuff. Most of that's made up. He was a dictator. That's the system there. Well, now they put the world leader of al-Qaeda in charge. And Trump met with him a few months ago in Saudi Arabia, and everybody's like, well, he's a tough guy, but who's there. And now he's slaughtering the Christians, the Muslim minorities, that aren't in his Wahhabist sect. And so it's very, very sick. And so, Netanyahu, we're fighting radical Islam. We're fighting for civilization. The Israelis had field hospitals for al-Qaeda, and we're giving them the weapons in the south. And then Turkey, to the north and the west, and NATO. And so they all ganged up. In fact, after 17 years trying to overthrow Syria, did it. So people say, well, then again, whose side are you on? It's not like a football game, folks. You have to understand that you have to make your own decision about what this is. So did I cry when, some of the military tyrants? I mean, in Iran, if a woman tries to go out and not wear a headscarf, and if she protests, they'll give them the death penalty. They have big mass executions every week where they have industrial cranes and they put it around your neck and just haul your ass up, strangle you. Jeez. They don't do the classic drop you and break your neck. No, they let you twitch for a long time, and they just line up women and just hang them. And so, but I understand that the Iranian Persian people are great people and they're under this oppression, but that doesn't give Israel then the green light to, sit there and preemptively start bombing them, but then Iran's threatening to attack them and trying to get nukes. It's all just sick.
It's complicated.
But again, it wouldn't have happened if the CIA with British intelligence in 53 and 79 hadn't done regime change of people that were pro-Western. They're like, no, we got our vote and our people get the money. And no, you can have half the oil money. This is our oil.
And so why does that make sense? Like if you look at everything from a 30,000 foot view, right? I used to be a SEAL. I was boots on the ground. You're up here looking at the macro version of what's going on, right? Why? What is their end game with this? Why do they want to keep instability in the Middle East? Is it a chessboard?
Well, that's exactly what they call it. In fact, we were hiking the other day, and you said, it seems like a chessboard, like Iran and Afghanistan are in the middle of it.
It's perfect pieces. If anybody who's ever played chess, there's certain positions on the board that you want to keep and you want to hold for as long as you can because it changes the whole dynamics of the entire game. So
Well, that's it. And I said, well, yes, there's a book written 20 years ago by Zbigniew Brzezinski called The Grand Chessboard. And he was the big international foreign policy guru in the Carter administration. And even though Carter was removed, his plans continued on through that. And he says to encircle Russia and finally take out Russia, you've got to have all the pieces right there in Central Asia. And right in the middle, that's Afghanistan and then Iran. And that's exactly what they're doing. So they are destabilizing that because that's the crossroads of the world. So the West has a pretext to stay there, move in military forces there, and occupy that. And if you want to occupy it, well, if you want a new crusade, well, you got to then back the radical Muslims. And again, they don't work for the West, but they're going to do what they're going to do. So the West will continually set them up, and then I guarantee in a year, maybe even sooner, we'll be attacking Syria again to remove the guy we just put in,
right.
And they'll just think everybody forgot that. That's sick.